So you have questions about software validation for your medical device submission. This is something we get all the time at Medical Device Academy. We get questions from companies either with software as a medical device, or we get questions from companies that have embedded software. So they have software that's part of their electromedical device, such as a digital thermometer would be an example, where it interprets the data that's coming into the microphone and analyzes the data and then spits it out digitally instead of you listening to it as in a traditional thermometer. A traditional stethoscope. So when you have these devices that have software, how do we validate them? Is like, how do I validate this? What do we have to submit for validation? Are pretty routine questions. But I'm going to try to walk you through some of the most basic questions that we get, the most common ones that we get as frequently asked questions. Number one question is, what do we have to provide for software validation documentation to the FDA? They always want to know, what do we have to provide? Just tell me the list and we'll provide that and we're done. There is a guidance document. It's a 2005 guidance document. I will put a hyperlink down below in this video that tell you precisely what you're supposed to provide to the FDA for software validation documentation. Keep in mind, the FDA is constantly updating their guidance documents, and one of the A-list items is they're going to be updating the software validation requirements for a 510K submission. So we expect this guidance to be updated, and they already published the draft, so you kind of have an idea of where they're headed with this, but they are going to be updating that document. The fundamental approach to validation isn't changing. They always want more detail. That's not a surprise, but the fundamental approach is going to be the same. In general, when you provide your software validation documentation to the FDA for a 510K, everybody should be using the new eSTAR templates. It's mandatory as of October 1st of next year, but everybody's using that if they're up to date on the 510K approach. That's definitely going to help you out because it makes sure you don't leave anything out of your submission. It skips the RTA screening process. They do a technical review, but that's much shorter. And it generally reduces the number of AI questions you have. And the reviewers really like these eSTAR templates. In the eSTAR template, you have different sections. Just like the traditional 510Ks, we had 20 sections. They have more sections, but one of the sections is software validation. In that software validation section, they have blue buttons that say, attach your document here. And they tell you what they want. So there are 11 items that you have in the 2005 guidance. Guess what? There are 11 items in the software section. They want you to attach those things. Makes perfect sense. They have a guidance document. They're forcing you to provide all the documentation that's required in the guidance document with the structure of the eSTAR. That's the FDA strategy with this new eSTAR. So the first thing it's going to ask you for is level of concern. You do not have to create your own level of concern document anymore. There's a place to there's a place to fill that in to answer the questions to determine whether it's level of concern. So one of the frequently asked questions we always got was, what approach do you recommend for answering the level of concern question? And it was really simple. Like, just copy and paste each of the questions that they ask and answer them, yes or no. And if it's a yes to one of the first set of questions, then it's going to be a major level of concern. If it's a yes to any of the next section, it's going to be a moderate level of concern. And if it's a no to everything, then it's a minor level of concern. The new eSTAR template automatically answers that question for you. You click yes or no to each of the questions, and then it determines automatically which category it is. So that's how you're going to answer that question in the future. You're just going to click the right radio button, and it gives you the answer. You can answer the question the way you want to, but if you don't answer it honestly, the FDA is going to say, this isn't correct. We think the answer to this question is a yes. You said no, and therefore it's not going to be the level of concern you think it is. But that only changes the amount of documentation you provide. The higher the level of concern, the more documentation they want. The lower the level of concern, the less documentation they want. It does not mean you do less validation. The next thing they're going to ask for is, could you please attach a device description? And I'm sorry, a software description. So they want a detailed description of your software. They give you a little paragraph explaining what they want, but in general, everybody puts too little detail. If your software has algorithms, they want to know how you develop those algorithms. They want details of the algorithm. They actually want the algorithm. That's something they want you to provide in that description. If your software has different modules of it, that needs to be explained. You need to explain what each module does. If data is input into the software, it does a calculation and takes that output calculation and gives it to the next module. They want you to explain that in very great detail. So the biggest thing I can say here is more detail. When you think you've gone too far, you probably are halfway there. The next item, software architecture diagrams. This is a flow chart that shows what your software does and shows the different modules. It's a visual representation of what should also be in your software description. So that's something they want you to attach. Every single one of these you have to attach. If you incorporate them all into one big document because you think it's easier, that doesn't help the submitter. So if I'm submitting for you, it's not going to help me at all because I have to break up your document into the little pieces, or I have to attach the document, rename it, because I can't attach the same document multiple times. It's smart enough to know I've already used that document. I can't use it again. And it says, no, 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 you can't use that document again. You can only use it once. Sorry. So you need to break up your submission for software validation into the different requirements. So each one's a separate document. Otherwise, you're going to have trouble completing the eSTAR. So that's another thing that comes up a lot. Should we have one document for the whole thing, or should we have a bunch of separate documents? Bunch of separate documents, definitely. And that also makes it easier to make revisions. You don't have to repaginate everything. You don't have to review the whole document. It's quicker for the reviewer to read through the document and skip pages if it's a shorter document. So several shorter documents, much better than one giant document. And logistically, that's the only way to get it through the FDA now. Another question that comes up from companies, very common question is, what standard are we required to use for the validation of this software? The standard that you use for medical devices is IEC 62304. Some companies don't know what that standard is. They aren't familiar with it. If you don't have somebody on your team that knows that standard, you need to hire somebody that has that standard. You have to hire somebody that knows it. Otherwise, you will not be successful. Somebody said, thank you for the endorsement on separate documents. Takes a lot of work to convince their team. Yes, I tried to convince people back when we were allowed to submit it as one big document that it would be easier this way. Nobody agreed with me. The FDA has spoken. They have 11 different buttons. You got to click a different, attach a different document for each. So they agree with that strategy. Another thing that you will find in the eSTAR, if you have a question about a document or one of the requirements, like I need to attach an algorithm, or I need the architecture diagram. There's also on the right-hand side of the document. So this is right-hand side in this video. You click on the right-hand side, there's a little question mark in blue, and that pops up a JavaScript window, and it explains the item to you. So that's their help feature. They call it the eSTAR. STAR stands for, well, eSTAR is electronic, submission, template, and resource. So the AR part is and resource, and the resource they're talking about is all the little question marks you can click on, give you a pop-up help menu that tell you, explain what they're looking for. So that's helpful. If somebody doesn't know 62304, they say, well, how do I do this? We don't know how to do this. We know how to do software. Can you just write it for us? No, we can't. Our firm knows how to edit. Our firm knows how to review the document and say, you're not meeting this requirement. You haven't provided enough detail. But our firm doesn't write your software validation protocols. We have one or two people on our team that probably could, but I'm not one of them. Uh, Bhumika, she actually used to develop software, so she probably could. Mary probably could. I definitely can't. Uh, but that's not our role. Our job is to prepare the submission and advise you on it. You need somebody on your team that can actually write those sections. So if you don't have somebody, you need to hire somebody. We do have procedures that, so if you need a procedure on software validation, so you have it in your quality system, we have that. It saves you the trouble of writing a procedure, but it doesn't, you don't read it and automatically know how. We've condensed down to a couple of pages the content that's in 62304. That's a very long standard that has a lot of detail. And by no means would I try to provide you cliff notes of that. That's just, it's too big of a document. We're just really providing sort of an outline. You need to do these things in the software validation process, bullet point level outline. Not it's not much more detail than the table of contents for 62304. So if you really want to know how to do software validation, you have to read 62304 and you have to get training on 62304. That's necessary. Now, what kind of person would be the right kind of person to do this? Can I just take a software developer out there and just give them 62304 and they'll be able to do this? Probably not. Most software developers hate doing documentation in the first place. To teach them a new standard that's completely foreign to them, that's specific to the medical device industry when they come from another industry, it's probably going to be a disaster. You really want to bring in somebody that knows 62304 already, not teach somebody on the job. When should you teach somebody 62304 on the job? When you already have somebody head of your software development department that is an expert in 62304, and they should be leading that training and coaching the person and developing them from scratch. You might hire somebody like, this person really knows this coding language. Maybe they know Python and we needed a Python programmer. So we hired them and we're going to teach them 62304. We know our software. We know how to do documentation. We need a Python programmer. We'll educate them so they can help us document the pieces they do. That makes sense. But you already had an expert in 62304 and they already had a department of software developers. Most of our clients are small companies that have one or two programmers and they don't know anything about 62304, and that's not a good start. So don't just say, oh, I got it to work. Just because you got it to work does not mean it can be validated. There's a lot of things that work that cannot be validated. It has to be validated. And if you can't document that each module worked, you don't have some sort of output to test, then you can't validate it. So you're going to have to rewrite your code so it can be validated. And that's a skill that you're only going to get from learning 62304. I get some people say, should I use the waterfall method or should I use the agile method? Really? Are we going to go back several decades and use waterfall? I don't even recommend waterfall approach for devices that don't have software. Really, don't use old technology. That the FDA didn't even invent the waterfall. They copied it from Health Canada, who copied it from ISO 9001 in 1994. That's really old technology. We're talking 30 years old now. So do not use the waterfall method for your software documentation. You may think it's easier, but your team works in the agile method. They're iteratively making changes to the software and they're going through those iterations very, very quickly. The agile method, you know you're doing that right when people can measure the velocity of software development. If you can't measure the velocity of software development, you don't know how many people you can need to throw at it. You don't know how long it's going to take to make a change or develop a new feature on your software, and you just don't have the right software team on board. So you want to have an agile process. You want to measure the process, how fast it goes, what the velocity of it is. You want to know how many people you need on each feature, each project that you're trying to develop. And you really want to be getting user feedback as you're developing it. So you have something where the UX, the user interface, makes sense and works for the end user of your product. Those are all important things. So we find, good software developers generally also make product that has a great user interface too. because they're used to that. That's part of the agile process, making sure you get feedback from the user for your next iteration. And they're used to doing it multiple times. Now, I'm going to get into a touchy area here. The area is cybersecurity. The FDA is supposed to come out with a new cybersecurity document. It's on their A list of final guidance documents to release in 2023. I already expected it to be done. I keep on asking people, when do you think it's going to come out? Some people are like, I already expected it. Some people are like, they won't come out with it until next year because it's going to take so long for them to finalize it. It's going to be a big change for the industry. They're going to probably double the amount of content that's in the software section. So we expect new little blue buttons to show up in the eSTAR of additional documents you're going to have to attach. So when people ask us, what cybersecurity documentation do I have to provide? The answer today is what it says in the 2 guidance documents for cybersecurity. You go through each of the headings of those guidance documents and you say, here's how we meet this requirement or why it's not applicable. And you go through each heading of that document, and that will satisfy the FDA. And you have to go through every single section. You can't skip a section. But when they release the new guidance document, you're going to not only have to have that plan in the risk analysis for cybersecurity like you do now, as well as the post-market surveillance plan for your cybersecurity, but you're also going to have to provide testing for security. So you have to prove that your software is secure. And the way you do that, you're going to be doing boundary analysis. You're going to be doing vulnerability testing. You're going to be doing penetration testing. Some things you can automate, some things you can't. For the things you automate, you're going to have to explain your process. It's just like validation of sterilization. What method do you use? Where's your protocol? Where's your report? Where's your raw data? Those are the kinds of things we have to provide for other types of validation. Same thing for validation of security. That's really what you're doing with a cybersecurity testing report. You're validating that your security methods work or verifying your security controls are working. So you're going to need that kind of report. They also were very savvy and said, we need the qualifications of the person that did the testing, and we need independence of the person doing the testing because, it's kind of pointless to ask somebody that wrote the code to hack the code. You want to ask somebody that didn't write the code to try to hack it, and you got to know what their qualifications are. So that's what the FDA is asking for. If you do some penetration testing, they're asking for describe your methods, provide a summary of the results, provide a CV or a resume for the person that did the work, saying what their qualifications are, and explain why they're independent of your team. They work for another company. So does your approved supplier list have a cybersecurity testing firm on it? Probably not. You might want to think about hiring one soon. So these are the things that we need. A lot of companies ask, what kind of off-the-shelf software documentation do I need? Whatever you think you need, multiply that times 10. They're asking on the cybersecurity side, please give us a list and put it in the labeling of your product, all the other software you're using. They want a software bill of materials for cybersecurity. So they're already gone the direction in the guidance. You shall provide a list of all the other software you used in your software documentation for the customer. The customer needs to know what software you used. You have to provide a software bill of materials. So why would you think you don't need to provide that information when you're providing off-the-shelf software documentation? You're using somebody else's software, you're putting in your system. You're not only going to have to put it in your software bill of materials, but you're also going to have to show that you've done the off-the-shelf risk analysis. You've assessed the risk of that software, maybe even done black box validation of that software, made sure it works properly. So that's important. Somebody says here, am I citing from the 2022 cybersecurity guidance right now? Yes, it's not from the eSTAR template. The cybersecurity, actually in the 2018 also, The draft guidance for cybersecurity had something in there requiring um, a cybersecurity bill of material in 2018, and then they amended that, so they said we'll just require you to provide a software bill of materials, not a cybersecurity bill of materials. So we don't need the hardware list; we just need the software list, and that's going to be required in the cybersecurity labeling. But we're already seeing today in the eSTAR, the FDA wants cybersecurity labeling, and they're asking questions about it. But it's this software bill of materials is a new requirement that's going to be a specific item that you're going to have to click on, and you're going to have to attach that labeling, and they're going to say on what page of your IFU can we find the software bill of materials. That's going to be a requirement. That'll be one of the requirements that you're going to have to provide, in that the person asks the smart questions. Is that already in the eSTAR? No, it's not. That's something that we're expecting a major amendment to the eSTAR when that guidance gets released. I don't know if they already have it prepared or not, but that's what I'm expecting. They're going to have to do an overhaul of that section when they make that live. But for those of you that are asking questions about off-the-shelf software, keep in mind the off-the-shelf software guidance document is really old. And the FDA, just because they have a really old guidance doesn't mean they're still following it. We find routinely the FDA has gone past the guidance document, and their current thinking is different from what's in the guidance document. So the level of detail that you had to provide a few years ago is not the level of detail you got to provide now. They're looking for a lot more detail. They want the full list of all the software that you're using that's off the shelf. This includes any libraries that you're using as well. And they want you to do a risk assessment of that off the shelf software. So that's important. Trying to think of other questions. I really thank you for the person that's leaving some notes in the chat. If you have any questions you want to ask, don't hesitate to drop them in there, and I'll try to answer them. People ask us routinely, do you have any recommendations for firms to do this? We have this question enough, and probably at least once a month, if not multiple times a month. So we recently put together a list of companies that we think are decent to work with, that we have some prior experience with, that can help us or help our clients with software documentation to IEC 62304. We're also trying to identify cybersecurity testing firms that can also do that. So if your firm falls into either one of those groups, don't hesitate to contact me. But we actually have a list that we're working on, and we're trying to give a list of companies that our clients can work with to those clients, and they're contacting the firms and they're asking them for quotes. I actually spoke with one this morning that I really like. So we'll be hopefully having a project that we can work on very soon. It's a new company that I ran across recently. They actually contacted us. And so they're already working on medical devices, and that's what their firm does, is the software validation and cybersecurity documentation. So I'm hoping that we have some clients that are very happy with their work, and we can promote using them more. But this is not an area where there are a ton of players. I can probably list off 20 people that do 510K submissions without any trouble that would do a great job, but I cannot list 20 companies that would do a great job of software validation for medical devices. That list is a much shorter list. Most of the companies that do a lot of this have their own resources in-house. So our niche, because we work with startup companies, often they don't have that skill in-house, or they have somebody that knows software but doesn't know the validation side, or they know validation but they don't know cybersecurity, and that's causing a problem for us, because the companies don't have the right group of people to help them with that software validation. So if you're thinking about starting your own startup company in medical device, and you're thinking about having software, which 90% of them seem to want to have software for everything, you're probably going to need to be thinking about, do I have the right people on the team that know this standard, know cybersecurity, and are going to build it? If you already have a product on the market, I would not be surprised, whoever the consultant is that you're currently working with, they're hitting a wall now. Like, I knew sort of how to answer the FDA's questions before for software validation and cybersecurity. Now I have no clue. They're way beyond my capabilities. Why? Because your consultant used to work at a company as the director of regulatory affairs, and they helped assemble the submission, and now they're doing it as an independent consultant. They were not the one writing the protocols. They were not managing the team that wrote the software. They were not the ones that knew how to do cybersecurity, because some of that stuff didn't even exist when they worked for that company. And so they've continued to keep up to date on what the FDA wants for a 510K, but they haven't been involved directly with a team writing software and validating that software, and they never had it as their primary responsibility. They had a silo organization, and they were in charge of quality and regulatory, or just regulatory. So that's going to be a weakness of independent consultants out there that are one person teams, whether whoever it is, that could be a weakness. Now, some of my peers out there, regulatory consultants, they do know software and they know it well. Those are gold, and you want to make really good friends with them, because there aren't many of us out there. But my approach has been, I'm a chemical engineer. I don't know software except Fortran 77, so I need to learn this stuff. So from day one, when I hired Mary Votter, I've been trying to stay up to date on what the software requirements are, so I can audit it. So I'm very good at auditing the software documentation. We have a lot of clients that do software validation and have software products. So I'm very strong in that area by intent. I intentionally went out there and got that. You need to find somebody that knows that. Otherwise, they're just not going to be able to put these submissions together for you if you don't have the expertise yourself. We've gone for about a half an hour here. If you have any other additional questions that you want to ask about software validation, please put it in the chat below or in the comments below for this YouTube video. If you have somebody else that has software validation questions at a company, please share the video with them. I would very much appreciate that, or hit like, and that way more people will add questions in the comments below, and we'll respond to them as we get them, and we will add it to our frequently asked questions document. We have actually a software validation frequently asked questions document that I'm going to be publishing soon. So all these questions that people are posting, I really appreciate it, and we will add those in. So if you have any questions, put them in the comments below. We will comment on them and share it with your friends so they can post their own questions. Have a great weekend, everybody, and talk to you next Friday. We will have another one, 12:30 Eastern time. Every Friday is when we have our live YouTube videos. Bye-bye.